This is fine arts course, and in this course, we are going to be having 10 different modules. So which also implies that we'll be having 10 different videos like this to explain different topics concerning that is related to the course. So, and in this module, which is the first module and the first video that we'll be having for this course, the topic that we'll be treating is introduction to finance. Mainly in this module, we'll be introducing ourselves to finance, the definition to finance, and also the historical developments of finance, and different perspectives and philosophies. Then also we also look at the roles of finance in the society. Mainly this in short, this module is just there to introduce us to the course, which is why the topic is introduction to finance. Now let's address the contents of the module. We have the module content to be one. We'll be looking at the meaning of finance, extremely looking at the meaning of finance. Then after that, we'll move on to the historical and philosophical perspectives that has to do with finance. Then we also look at the contemporary views. And afterwards, we will move on to looking at addressing the historical developments of finance in the world. Then finally, the last subtopic that we'll be looking in this module is the role of finance in society and culture generally. And for the introduction to the this module, we have that finance is a concept that has evolved over countries, encompassing various forms of creative expression that prioritizes aesthetic, intellectual, and expressive purposes. From the ancient civilizations to modern day society, finance has played a significant role in shaping cultural identity, promoting social change, and fostering community engagement. However, which implies that in this module, we'll be exploring the definitions, the historical developments, and role of finance in the society and culture generally as a whole. So this is just like introduction. What we are trying to establish in this introduction is to illuminate us about the fact that finance has been evolving over different centuries. Just that there has been some kind of developments in when we are talking about finance. We cannot compare finance in like the 19th, 18th century to that of 21st century, considering the fact that there has been some rapid changes in terms of technology and all, which has aided the growth of finance massively. So this is where mainly in this so in this course we mainly address all these things. This module will mainly address all these development that we have mentioned concerning the growth of finance over the years and over in different centuries. So this module we will explore the define what finance is, the historical developments of finance, and even the role of finance in society and the culture as a whole generally. So now let's move on to the meaning of finance. Now, what do we refer to as finance? So when we hear finance, what comes to our mind? These are the things that we are going to be answering in this subtopic. Now, finance can also be called art of art in French. It is a concept that scholars and art historians trace primarily to 18th century European academic traditions. So we can easily trace the the concept of finance to 18th and 18th century European academic traditions. So it was referred to visual art. It was referred to as visual art created primarily for aesthetic, intellectual, or expressive purposes rather than for practical utility or functions. So what we are trying to establish here is that finance is mainly has to do is a visual entity. It's something that is being seen. So it is a visual entity or visual art that is created for aesthetic, intellectual, or expressive purpose to pass across a message rather than just practical utility alone. So a widely accepted modern definition of finance is that finance is defined as. Sorry about that. A widely accepted modern definition of fine arts is that it is defined as a visual art considered to have been created primarily for aesthetic and intellectual purpose and judged for its beauty and meaningfulness. Fine art is not there for the fun of it. It is there to pass across a meaning. It is passing across a function and meaning. It is also passing across a message. So it's mainly being judged by the beauty, its beauty, and the message that is fine art, the art is passing across. So that's how we can actually judge fine art. So this typically includes painting. When we are talking about fine art, it mainly includes painting, sculpture, drawing, and graphics, with architecture sometimes included despite its utility. So fine art, the concept of fine art revolves around painting, sculpture, drawing, graphics, and the likes. So now let's move on to the historical and philosophical perspectives. Now, the modern idea of fine arts emerged in the mid-18th century. French scholars Charles Bartholdi in his 1746 work, which is Les Beaux Arts Réduits en Même Principe, was among the first to systematically define fine art. Sorry about that. Now, the thing is that this scholar was among the main pioneers that first actually gave a proper definition and description to what we refer to as fine arts. Now, this definition includes painting, sculpture, music, poetry, and dance. So, as imitations of, he defined these fine arts as imitation of beautiful nature, which is aimed at providing pleasure through representation, distinguishing them from mechanical or useful arts. Another scholar, Immanuel Kant, in his philosophy of art, he described fine arts as the art of genius, a purposive representation without a practical end, promoting aesthetic contemplation and the free play of imagination and understanding. Another scholar, the art historians like Paul Oscar Christelia, he noted how the system of fine arts was codified in the 18th century, separating non-utilitarian art from applied or decorative ones. So these are different scholars that has in one way or the other contributed to the philosophical perspectives of fine art. We have scholars like Charles Bartholdi, who, in his own point of view, who was among the first people that systematically defined fine art. In his own point of view, he sees fine art as the imitation of beautiful nature that is mainly aimed at providing pleasure through representation and all. While Immanuel Kant, on the other hand, another scholar, in his philosophy art, he described fine art as the art of genius, a purposive representation without a practical end. In this, according to Immanuel Kant, fine art is attached to being a genius because it has to do with someone that can critically think and depict what he or she is thinking about. Art historian Paul Oscar, on the other hand, noted how the system of fine arts was codified in the 18th century also. These are different scholars that has given philosophical perspective to what we refer to as fine arts today. Now let's move on to the contemporary views now. When I'm talking about contemporary views, it has to do with this century and era. So in today's academic and arts world discussion, some scholars like Michel Madakami argue that argue for stricter definitions, excluding architecture due to its utility and emphasizing representational, communicative, or imitative qualities. Others note that modern contemporary practices have blurred lines, prioritizing the artist's intention over strict categories. So this is mainly the contemporary views. And overall, according to most scholars in this century, fine arts prioritizes beauty, emotional depth, intellectual engagement, and creative expression for its own sake, setting it apart from art forms with everyday practical rules. Now let's move on to the historical developments of fine arts now. Fine art does not just go to this stage all of a sudden. There have been some kind of involvements and developments over the centuries and over the years. Now, when we are talking about the historical development of fine art, we can see it as both a creative practice and a distinct conceptual category, unfolded gradually over centuries, just like we have mentioned initially. And it is rooted in ancient human expression, but fully formalized in the modern Western sense during the 18th century. Now, artistic creation began in prehistory with cave paintings and carvings from the Upper Paleolithic era around 40,000 years ago. So now we can actually say that the artistic creation began before the history with the painting of caves and carvings in different era. That is where we can trace fine art history to, which serve as ritual or communicative roles mainly rather than pure aesthetic. This is then it was not just for the beauty of it, it was serving as ritual and even some kind of communicative rules rather than just pure aesthetic, and continued through ancient civilizations like the Greece and Rome, where arts emphasized mimesis, that is imitation of nature, beauty, proportion and harmony, though without separating fine from utilitarian art. Now, continuation of the historical development of finance, we have the Renaissance in the 14th to 17th century. It also marked a crucial shift, particularly in Italy, where humanism revived classical ideas, elevating painting, sculpture and drawing through innovation in perspective, anatomy and realism. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo and Raphael, they gained recognition during this era as intellectual creators, and terms like Arte di Designo began grouping design based on arts as superior to mere crafts. So now, by the 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers, they codified the modern system of fine arts, most influentially through Charles Baudelaire in 1746 in his work, which defined them as imitation of beautiful nature for pleasure only. And primarily, it is, according to him, fine art revolves around primarily painting, sculpture, music, poetry, and the likes, and dance. And dance, which distinct from mechanical or useful of art. We also have another scholars like Immanuel Kant, just like we have mentioned, that he reinforced this by viewing fine arts as purposive yet purposeless focus on aesthetic contemplation and genius. Scholars such as Paul Oscar also later highlighted that this unified system of fine arts was largely an 18th century European invention, absent in earlier periods. The 19th century saw Romanticism. Now we have the touch of Romanticism in the 19th century, which prioritized emotion and individuality over classical rules, followed by the arts for art's sake, detaching art further from utility, while movements like Impressionism and Post-Impressionism also, they play an important role. Now in the 20th and 21st century, modernism, for instance, we have the Cubism and abstraction, and postmodernism, the blurred boundaries between fine arts and applied arts, embracing new media, conceptualism and functionality, leading contemporary scholars to view fine arts as a culturally constructed Western category that is tied to institutions like academics and museums, though its core emphasis on aesthetic, intellectual and expressive autonomy continues to evolve amid diverse global influences. Now let's move on to the rules of fine arts in society and culture. The rules of fine arts in society and culture. Fine art, including painting, sculpture, drawing, paintmaking, architecture, and related visual forms, they play a profound and multifaceted role in society and culture. Now, they are far more than decoration or entertainment. They serve as essential tools for human expression, reflection, and transformation. We have when we are talking about the rules of fine art, it serves as mirror and reflection of society. So in the sense that fine arts act as a mirror, capturing the values, beliefs, struggles, emotion, and realities of the time and place in which they are created, in which they are what we are trying to address here is that fine arts is now reflecting and passing across a message or information of the society based on the particular time this art is created. They document history visually from ancient sculptures to contemporary installation, helping future generations to understand how people have lived, how people have thought, and how people have felt in the previous centuries and years. Now, the second rules of fine art is that it's there to preserve and express preservation and expression of cultural identity. Now, fine arts preserve heritage, traditions, and collective memory. Now, people are, for example, in the likes of the museums that has become a rampant something now in the 21st century. When people want to know more about their heritage, their traditional background, and the memory of what has happened in the past, they visit different museums to see art that is depicting these histories. Now, fine arts also bridge between cultures and promotion of understanding. of understanding art. So art function as a universal language that transcends words, border languages, and time periods. It also serves as catalyst for social change and critique throughout history. Now, in conclusion, we have been able to understand. In conclusion, we should be able to understand that finance is a multifaceted concept that encompasses various forms of creative expression, prioritizing aesthetic, intellectual, and expressive purpose over practical utility. The modern notion of finance emerged in the 18th century Europe, influenced by scholars like Charles Barthes and philosophers like Immanuel Kant. Now, today in the 21st century, finance has continued to evolve, incorporating diverse perspectives and challenging traditional boundaries. Its significance extends beyond the individual creativity, playing a vital role in shaping cultural identity, promoting social change, and fostering community engagement. Thank you. That will be the end for this introduction to finance. We'll move on to the next subtopics in this next module, where we are addressing the next important topic, where we are talking